you can't do it alone. There's a certain inflection point, 30, 40 people. It is about the team. You have to bring, it's about execution at that point. It's always going to be about the vision, but execution becomes really, really, really important.
Hi, I am Sophie Vaux, and this is the Rise and Play podcast. In the show, I sit down with influential thought leaders of the gaming industry to deconstruct how they create the best team and company cultures in order to create the best games. Every episode brings actionable insight to improve your leadership, self-awareness, and emotional management skills. Because becoming a better leader starts with becoming a better human. So, are you ready to unlock your full potential in life and business? Let's begin. Don't just see the future, know the future with today's sponsor, Solsten. They make it easy to identify how your audiences and players actually play and what keeps them coming back for more. In a previous life, I used Solsten Product Navigator for a game in soft launch and discovered that my audience was more complex than I thought. Instead of one homogeneous group, I was able to identify two unique persona, take a series of calculated risks in our game design, and strike a balance between the two groups. Our approach shifted from making a game for everyone to creating a personal experience for most valuable players. And we were able to put our resources and time to good use and launch our game with a high level of confidence in its success. Visit go.solsten.io that you can find in the show notes for a demo. Mention Rise and Play and receive a free feature, theme, and art style study included with your Navigator purchase, a $20,000 value. Learn why EA, Supercell, Wooga, and more use Solsten to create the best human-centric gaming experiences possible. So welcome everyone to a new episode of Rise and Play, and today I'm super excited to have with me a good friend in games and also has been a partner in the previous company I worked at when I was building my first casual studio at Vodou, which I consider still today in my career my kind of masterpiece game, Plantopia, with my 9-Carrots team at the time. And we worked very early stage with what was called not Solsten, but 12 Traits. And I have here now Bastian on the podcast to talk about the whole journey of Solsten. Used to be 12 Traits, to starting the idea of a product to what it is today. We are always catching up and we talk about leadership, teams, culture. And the podcast has had a lot of focus on team culture and leadership. And the conversation was really as your company scales and grows, people need to grow with it. And you need to evolve the systems and procedures around it to fit your company, business, and your team. So how do you design organization that actually fit your people and allow them to grow and scale? How do you enable culture and how culture can grow and proliferate unless the right system are in place at the right stages of company growth? So before I let you start, Bastian, just a few words also. He's the co-founder and CEO of Solsten. As I said, Solsten is a company providing player insights with deep psychological insights with machine learning. And if you want to know more about it, I put the link in the show notes. Hi, Bastian.
Good morning, Sophie. It's really, really good to be here and it's good to see you again.
Okay, then let's start with the start. What did you do before Solsten? And as a reminder, what led you to create the company with Joe, the co-founder? Like, what did you see at the market at the time that was a gap that was like, okay, this is it. 5 years later, this is still your company. So it's a long-term vision, right? It was not just opportunistic. What did you see?
Yeah, those are all very, very good questions. It was opportunistic in the sense that specifically, Joe saw a big opportunity, and I was fortunate enough that he wanted to bring me in and do this with me as his co-founder, and really let me in on his vision. So we definitely saw an opportunity, but we were very clear from the beginning that what Solsten's vision and mission is and what it will ultimately be. It's kind of like almost like you're building a pyramid. That doesn't happen overnight. But yeah, we go back 20 years. We actually met in high school. funny enough. I was a foreign exchange student. I went to the States for a few years and we met in French class. Please don't test my French skills. I'm going to be very, very embarrassed in front of you. After college, I started my career because I have an economics background. I started pretty traditionally. I dabbled a little bit with investment banking, M&A, and then I got into consulting. And my first real full-time job was with the Boston Consulting Group. Very focused on digital strategy, digital marketing across industries, but there was an entertainment media focus in there. And I actually was on quite a few projects around customer journeys, customer segmentation. How are we thinking about audiences, especially in the context of digital customer journeys, digital strategy, and how do you really engage your consumers? And that was 2014. I left when I returned from New York towards the end of, was the fall of 2015, moved to Berlin, and started my first company, which ended up being a company builder called WhatX. And what was interesting about that, and I think this is relevant to the conversation for today a little bit, as a part of that, like halfway through that journey, kind of like when we hit the 20 people, 25 people mark, we were a year and a half, 2 years into that journey. I really started wrestling with the question of, okay, if we're doubling in size, how does that change the company? How does that change the setup? How does that change how we're currently operating and how we're being successful? And how can we do what we're doing better and accounting for scale? And as a part of that, this was kind of like the prelude to us coming together on Solsten. I actually asked Joe because at that time, I want to say he had just joined Big Fish as the director of UX. I think so. I might be getting the timelines a little off here, but I think he had just joined. And I asked for his help and I said, hey, because he was still active, he was still working as a clinical psychologist. And I said, can you help me understand my team? I think that was the pretty like vague ask that I had. Like, I want to figure out how do we build better teams? And it's not much different from kind of like the early game development journey that you're taking or any sort of product that you're developing where there's some form of ideation that happens in the beginning. You're going to some form of concepting, prototyping stages. You're doing a bunch of testing in between. And then eventually you see this thing has legs. So what we started doing is we looked at the team's psychology and started to figure out who are the people that are going to be best suited for the tasks given the different stages of that journey that we just talked about, as well as who are the people that are going to be really effective working together in those different stages. Because it goes far beyond skills, right? When you're talking about ideation, for example, you want a lot of divergent thinking in the beginning. Mm-hmm. You want, the space for people to go broad, to explore, to come up with the crazy. So you're looking, for example, for personality traits like openness. So we started doing this work, rearranged the team. We actually ended up writing Harvard Business Review article on it, which was fun and super interesting too. But the result of that was we ended up being 3 times more effective in how we operated. But to me, this was really, I didn't need any more convincing about the power and the value and the usefulness of getting to know people at that level and the impact that it can have on companies that you're building, cultures you're trying to create, products you're trying to build, teams that you're putting together, experiences that you're making for other people. Because I saw it firsthand within a context in a company that I had built from nothing and how much better we were. Like we were doing well before, but it just got so much better afterwards. So it's like, this stuff is real. Like it's, this idea of if I get to know people and I understand the right things about them and I know what to do about that, it has very material and lasting positive impact. And I think it was about a year and a half later when Joe left Big Fish and I handed the company over to my co-founder, who was my CTO at the time. And we started Solsten because he had started to test and apply some of the thinking, some of the theories in the context of Big Fish. And, I think when you start to see across different games, monthly revenues jumping by 50% or what have you, and you know that nothing else got changed, but you dialed 2 specific things in the game that were directly informed by the psychology of your player base in that case, he knew that there's a lot of merit to this. So it was really the idea of, well, how do we scale this and how do we make this accessible? And from day one, it was always a healthcare company. It was always a health tech company because mental health was always a very core focus. And I think that's the other part of to your question, the opportunity that we saw, there's the market potential, and you see the very real revenue numbers and what it does in a video game to engagement and retention. And we've been seeing it for the last 5.5 years with our customers. Like, the proof's in the pudding, the proof is all there, the stuff works, the teams that really dive in and get to know their players on that intimate level and put in the work and are just curious to really understand their players as the humans that they are, rather than spenders versus non-spenders. Like, a lot of that stuff's important and it gets you to a certain baseline, but it doesn't actually tell you anything about the human that you're designing to. So there's the other component around what we've been seeing in the last 15, 20 years, really through the rise of mobile phones, social media to a large extent. We as a species, as humans, we've become very efficient. Things have become very convenient for us. And the flip side to that same coin are, I think we have about 30% more depression in the Western world. We not only have we proven correlation to mobile technology, to our phones, to social media, sometimes games too, but we've proven causality. We're at that point. Like, it's unrefutable at this point. So what Solsten was always meant to achieve from day one, and we're starting to get there, is, well, if you're actually knowing the person and you actually know what your player needs, or the person that you're making experience for really fundamentally needs, and you can cater to that, you're creating an experience that's going to have lasting value, that's going to provide a lot of lasting utility to that person. And what that does is it gets people away from addictive loops by actually providing utility to them, and they're going to come back. And it's also good for business, because what's the more valuable customer? Is it the player that ends up playing for 30 days, or is it the player that ends up playing for 3 years? Or in the case of EVE Online, like, there's people that have played this game for 21 years. So you don't have to play game X every single day. And it's very intentional, and you feel very good about it, and you leave the experience, you go, that felt great, and I'm going to do that again. Not because your brain goes, last time you clicked that button, that felt really good, I need you to do that again. And you actually don't have a lot of control over it. It's what we started talking about before, when we got on this morning, the whole awareness part about us, and how do we become better people too. But yeah, sorry, that was a very, very long answer, but I wanted to your question, but hopefully that provides some context that's useful.
So there's another part of the conversation, which is, of course, when you cannot change the economics, you can change the ones who are part of the economics, and they have a company to change the rules of the game. That's why I've been supporting not only the product of Solsten, but also the ethos behind it, where my purpose is toward the same direction. How can we use our time, expertise, knowledge, even money, capital, to create a world that is a bit more sustainable in technology and add actual value? And I'm not talking about economic value, but really value in the lives of people to live a healthier, more fulfilled life. And I'm confident that the economics will follow, maybe not in the first year, but in the long term, because that's how economics work, right? If humans scale value, what they get, then they will pay for it, So I don't know if there's am I correct saying this? What do you think?
No, I think you nailed it, and you brought up a couple of really, really important nuances there. This idea of sustainable games and building games that last is something that I've been hearing, and we've been hearing more and more and more from our different customers and people that we talk to in the space proactively. Comes up more and more, and I think one of the catalysts is it's always with business. Money goes where attention is, right? And in this kind of recessionary, but not really recession environment, like, we don't really know what we're in, but people are, saving costs, and there's, layoffs everywhere, and this and that. There's been, especially for the more established players, like I'm talking about the EAs and, some of the bigger guys, there's been a shift towards, let's continue to invest in what we know is already working, and how do we take that from it's been here for 5 years to 15 years. And with every new game that they're pushing through the pipeline, they've become a lot more careful and more, not conservative, but more long-term thinking in their approach, exactly to what you said. how is this something that can stand the test of time? How is this actually a game that can be around for 10 years? Is this something that's going to end up being really, really sustainable? One of my favorite examples is, when you look at Facebook today, well, Facebook works off of ads, right? That's why everyone uses it. And that's why they have a ton of users, and they can only work off of ads because they have, I think it's like around 2 billion users or something like that. Because the click-through rates are actually terrible. It's like 0.1%. So if they had 100 million users, the whole model wouldn't work. Like they need 2 billion people. But if you ask yourself, well, what if Facebook starting tomorrow wasn't monetized by ads anymore? It was actually a subscription service. Let's say you as a consumer were asked to pay $5 for Facebook every single month. Imagine you as a user, as a consumer, same with Instagram, how your perception of the service would change all of a sudden, and what you would expect in terms of utility that you get from it, in order for you to say, yeah, I'm willing to pay $5 for that every single month because I get a lot from it. And that's, it's directly related to what you said, this idea of sustainability. And I think people are getting sick from it. That's full stop. The evidence is there. So users are going to demand that, and they're going to start gravitating towards things that make them feel good, but not just in the short term, but long term, where they actually get value from, and they leave an experience. And we've had this from players, that from our clients that we work with, they saw like great engagement and net promoter scores going up, and they would, then go in and survey and ask their players, like, what was it? And when you start to see things like, well, that event, it felt like it was made for me. That's the level of, I think that's the level of connection that really, really synthesizes, big part of this conversation, where the whole industry is moving. And what I love about it is you have close to 3.2 billion people playing a video game every single day. So games as a medium they're already proliferating into every other industry. So if we're talking about collectively, everyone in this industry is having an opportunity for impact, hey, we're touching more than 75% of the people that are connected to the internet.
Yeah.
Like talk about large scale change, or large scale opportunity for really profound, lasting change. And I think games are the catalyst and the gateway to do that.
Yeah, totally. And also, then going forward, let's go into as well the psychological insight and lens when thinking about teams, because I'm very passionate about that topic. As you know, I think that's what brought us together in 2019. And I did put a lot of thoughts, and I put it on my masterclass on how I build the team. And I didn't know you were looking at it even before Solsten. So I'm very curious to understand how you build early stage, then like growing stage, in those phases, how you approach the composition of a team, and using the psychological insights for either creative teams or what is needed at different phases. If you can go through the theory of how you have approached it at Solsten.
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. And the important thing to realize is, you're two founders, and you're trying to find a couple people to help you build this. So that's a certain kind of crazy. I mean, in like most loving way, but those are like particular people that come in for like very particular reasons. There's something about the topic, or there's a very personal connection, but those are special people. And you go from that to, I'd say, about 10 people. That's like your first cohort of the baseline, the foundation that you're really trying to set. You go from 20 to 50. Now you're starting to have more formalized teams. You're starting to have a little bit more structure. And where I'm going with this is as the company changes, as the business changes, so do the roles within the company. And a lot of times that part is the hardest for the people that have been here before, because their role is changing as the company is changing. It's very different when you go into an established company, right? And you're joining Amazon today as pick a role, like backend engineer. What being a backend engineer at Amazon means today versus in 2 or 3 years, it will probably be very similar, like probably the same. There's a lot of like stability to it, in the sense of what am I What's the understanding of my role? What's my own understanding of my contribution? What am I being asked to do? How critical is my contribution? And so on and so forth. When you go to 20 to 50, 50 to 100, that changes. All of a sudden, the team around you gets bigger. Maybe there's more junior people. Now you have to help mentoring, you have coaching. Other people are looking up to you because you've been here for 2 years. You have so much context. And whether you know it or not, people are looking up to you. They're looking at patterns. They're looking at how you're behaving. You're setting an example every single day. So that is honestly the hardest part. And where, the insights that you mentioned for us really started, how we started to leverage them was we really looked at, okay, who are, I think we did this about half a year ago. We're a little over 70 people now. We're still hiring. We're continuing to grow. We're continuing to scale. So we started looking at, okay, the people that have been here the longest, who've been the most successful throughout those different stages, what do they have in common? And then you go, how do those aspects about those people relate to the company and the culture that we want to build? And I think that's a very important part. As you're continuing to scale, culture is really important. And you kind of you have to actively work on your culture, and you have to define it and then live it and embody it. If you don't do that, especially as you start to scale, it starts around like the 20 people mark. The people that are coming on board, they will define your culture for you very quickly. And then what happens now is, as a part of our interview process, we know what sort of values we look for very, very quickly as they relate to our culture, as they relate to historically what's made people very successful here. And we ask very specific, direct questions that allow us to gauge very quickly, are they going to fit here really well and continue to elevate the team and elevate the culture as that we've built and that we want to continue to build out? Or are they going to have a really hard time? And it's not that people are bad people. It's not about, it's a good person or bad. It's about, is this a mutual fit for one another? And you're making sure that every element that you add into the mix, every ingredient continues to elevate and make the team holistically better and continue to foster that culture and that environment that you really want to live in.
Very interesting. And one point I would like to reflect or I take away is really, because culture is first an intention. You verbalize your intention, as a management team or from the beginning, that's where we want to go. See it as a North Star, but that doesn't mean that you will get there or that it's reflecting the reality. Someone told me like culture is what happens when you're not watching. Am I correct to say that basically it's a constant, like, I don't know, to do it on a yearly basis or key momentums of a company growth? Like, let's check the data. Let's look at where we are, the key people, what we have in common. And this is our theory about the values, and update it regularly, and then reflecting back on the people we're hiring. Because I guess what you're looking for are people for sustainable hires that will evolve through the transitions of the company.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think the amount of times you do it per year, it certainly varied throughout our journey in the beginning. And then as you start to have those first inflection points very quickly, you do it a little more often, I'd say. We're now at a point where we do it somewhere between once to twice a year. And it's not like set in stone timeframes. It's more about inflection points where, for example, you see, we're going to go and we're catalyzing the next phase of growth. Like we want to hire, there's like 50 people that we want to bring on board. And you kind of like pause and reflect and say, okay, this next batch, this next growth, like what does that mean? How is that going to change the company? How is that going to change the culture potentially? What do we have to account for so that what we've built, what's worked really well, what we want to keep, how are we making sure that we're accounting for that in that next way? So that would be like a really good inflection point. Or it could also be, as you're starting to bring in senior leadership too. And I think that's one of the hardest things in the transition, as you're going from things being founder-led and founder-driven to you're really empowering your team. There's a certain size threshold where You have to, because you're becoming one of the biggest risks as a founder to the growth and the prosperity of your company, because things become overly dependent on you. So you're going to need senior support. You're going to need senior leadership that effectively, to a large extent, make your role in the day to day obsolete. Mark Randolph and Reed Hastings, the co-founders of Netflix, they define success as when we get to the point where for 2 weeks in a row, we don't have to make a single decision in the day to day, and the business can continue to run and thrive. That's when you know you've hired the right people, the team's in place, the systems in place, the procedures are in place. So it's a really good mental model for us to know when, like, you're stepping away, did it work? Okay, this broke over here, so we can't step away too much over here. So you're constantly, stepping away, going back a little bit, stepping away, going back a little bit, with the goal being you can step away, not to go on a cruise ship and not do anything anymore, but it's about growing into your actual role that the business then also needs you to do. And I think what's really important about that is you can't do it alone. There's a certain inflection point, 30, 40 people. It is about the team. You have to bring, it's about execution at that point. It's always going to be about the vision, but execution becomes really, really, really important. And you can't do that without a team, because there's too many things at stake. And there's also, quite frankly, better people out there than you as a founder. Like, you can't do everything, every domain, every discipline at the same level of a person that's been, I don't know, a marketing executive in your space, or like a game lead on 5 of these titles. Like, the type of caliber that you can bring in from a person that just spent their entire career in that domain, that level of mastery, that's not your role as a founder, to be a master of all of the dimensions at scale. And that's the hard part, is like realizing and experimenting with how soon is too soon, how much is too much, but getting comfortable with letting go. And that's back to the hiring conversation, like bringing in the right people. But those would be inflection points too for revisiting and updating. Like, are we clear on our values? How are we articulating that? How are we living that when more senior leadership comes on board? And to be honest with you, this is the hard part about the remote work too, and hybrid work. I think as you're thinking about scaling, as you're thinking about culture, you said it really well. It's all the behaviors. It's the stuff when no one's watching. Well, how does that happen? How does that manifest itself if we're all just in Zoom rooms and everyone's in their own apartment working from home all day? You're not observing any of that. You're observing yourself. You're in maybe your partner is there, or maybe your kids, and you're going to the kitchen and you come back to your desk, and you, other than the Zoom meeting or maybe some Slack messages, you did not encounter really any of those people. And I think it's a really challenging part to scale successfully and cultivate culture fully remotely. I actually don't think I'm going on a limb. I don't think it's possible, or you're not going to get the best possible outcomes. Don't get me wrong. That doesn't mean that I'm not an advocate for everyone has to be in the office 5 days a week. No, I don't think we're going back to that reality, but the benefits of sharing time in the same space for the company at large, but also for the team and even individuals, they're undeniable. Think about the junior person that is out of college. They take their first job and they're starting, and that's their first job out of school, out of college, and they're sitting at their desk at home. What kind of experience, like, how does that help them mature, grow up, and ease into the working world? And how do they become a really integral piece of this overall culture that helps you ultimately scale the company? How do they adopt the systems and the processes that you need at that point? Because that's the same thing. Process for the sake of process. It's not about that. And just because you've written down a process and it's documented on Notion or wherever, that doesn't mean people are gonna adhere to it. And people adhering to it, you can try to brute force it. That's not sustainable. It's back to culture. You observe other people doing it, and it's just how they operate. It's natural. It's just how they do it, and people are going to follow in lockstep and adopt similar patterns and behaviors automatically.
Well, a lot to reflect on, and I see as well we reached the end of our conversation. Thanks a lot for sharing. I would like, I'll put this as a request. I know you're writing these days, but I'd love if there would be a writing a bit more like going in depth of, as well, like more psychological traits on how you're hiring, even like assessing your staff, because there's a whole conversation, or I would say, or I don't know, it's a controversial topic, but how do you do that? Yeah, respecting data and having the consent of people to be evaluated. I think it's helpful to understand that. It's like, well, let me show you who I am. And then so we can, dialogue and understand each other. But that would be for another conversation, maybe another episode.
Absolutely.
Well, Bastian, thanks a lot for your time. And I wish you good luck for the growth of the company. But I have confidence with how you're approaching it and your principles. And I look forward to hearing, what's the next steps and maybe your insights on how to build teams.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Sophie. Appreciate your time and the kind words. And likewise, best of luck, with you guys in continuing to grow Savage too.
Thanks for listening to this latest episode of the Rise and Play podcast. I am trying to grow a community of conscious leaders across the industry and beyond. So if you want to join this movement, please share the podcast with other conscious leaders, because we have so much more we can learn from each other. Also, please don't forget to follow the show so you don't miss out on future content. Every episode is packed with actionable insights that will help you improve your leadership skills now. And if you are interested in learning more on the topics that we discussed today, you can find more insights on riseandplay.io, and there you will also find my free masterclass on conscious leadership. So have a great week, and until the next time,